Every time someone honked, it was as if someone was driving a white-hot poker through his sinuses. Some impatient drivers chose to drive on the left-hand side of the median to get ahead of everyone else, and this infuriated Johnson. Where did these people get their sense of entitlement? Who did they think they were? They didn't have to wait like everyone else. What made them so special? Look at me in my SUV, so much more important than everyone else. I don't have to wait. Waiting is for suckers. I'm just an ignorant, egotistical moron with an expensive, flashy car. Johnson's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His brow was tense and his teeth were clenched. I need to calm down, he thought. I just need to get home. Just then, flashing red lights from emergency vehicles came into view up the road. As he inched closer and advanced past the fire trucks, he saw the scene of a semi laying on its side. There were 3 other cars that were in the wreck. If anyone had been injured, it seemed that they had been already taken away by the ambulances. There was broken glass, antifreeze, oil, and other debris laying all over the road. One of the cars was a white Honda Civic that was laying upside down, completely demolished, and there was an unmistakable red sheen of blood coming out from underneath it. When he realized what he was looking at, it made him cringe. But what really disturbed him was the fact that the reason that they had been taking so long in this traffic jam wasn't because of lack of space to move, but because people were slowing down to look at the wreck. This is why I'm stuck in traffic, he said aloud, because of people's morbid curiosity? I'm surprised they haven't made a reality TV show yet, America's Worst Car Wrecks. And then, Johnson got a sinking feeling in his chest, because he realized that in all probability, the show already existed. When Johnson finally got home an hour later, he closed his blinds, took 3 Sudafed, and against his better judgment, downed a 1/4 bottle of NyQuil. He got into bed, threw a pillow over his eyes, and settled into a restless sleep. That night, Johnson suffered from intense fever dreams. Painful dreams that made him feel like his head was stuck inside a tumble dryer. Dreams that screamed at him. Dreams that mocked him. Dreams that manipulated and used him. Trickster dreams. Abusive dreams. Dreams that sucked out his life force. Amidst these dreams, he stumbled upon an acorn of light, an insane idea that gave him peace. The idea was bigger than him, but if he could find a way to remember it, he felt that he could heal the world. If he could only find a way to hold on to that idea and take it through the twisted, dark forest of nightmares where all the monsters of the subconscious roam and bring it into the light of the morning, he could fix everything. Johnson woke and immediately lumbered to the nightstand for a pen, and not finding any paper, he ripped open the box that the NyQuil came in and wrote on the inside, "Positive virus." He wrote it 5 times to make sure he got it. Although he desperately felt like going back to sleep, he forced himself up because he knew that if he went back to sleep, he would lose the meaning of those words. Positive virus, he now told Richards. It's a virus that increases dopamine levels, particularly in the intake area of the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure center of the brain. It also ramps up the hypothalamus's production of oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone/neurotransmitter released during, among other times, orgasm. Richards looked befuddled. So you made a drug? A virus, said Johnson. This makes no sense, said Richards. There's no way you could have... But I did, said Johnson. I did it. I injected myself and it's working. Frank, you're joking. Please tell me you're joking, said Richards. And they won't be able to take it away from me this time. I saw to that, said Johnson. What have you done? Asked Richards. Is this about the email? A sly grin came over Johnson's face. So I sent out a few press releases. Big deal. They'll put you away, Frank. Johnson didn't like the response he was getting from Richards. He had expected his friend to support him in this. They can't. They wouldn't. This is the find of the century. I'll just have a little more control this time because my name will be at the forefront. Johnson saw a miserable look come over Richards' face. You're looking at it all wrong. It's just... No way, said Richards. There is so much wrong here. Let's just take away the fact that you've experimented on yourself, or that you've been modifying a virus, or that you've gone over the company's head. Did you stop to think that this isn't how to make people happy? You're taking away choice. People won't be choosing happiness for themselves. If they get injected, it'll be forced on them. We should be trying to even people out from serious chemical imbalances, not create a new opiate. But it's not a drug, it's a virus, I know. Can you hear yourself? Shouted Richards. Just then, they realized that they weren't alone in the room. Barry and 2 other security officers were standing just outside the doorway. In front of them was an administrative assistant to Dr. Daniels. Dr. Daniels was the chief administrator of the facility and their boss. Dr. Johnson, he said, Dr. Daniels would like to see you in his office. Now. Dr. Johnson headed towards the door without apprehension. Clearly, he had expected this response. Just before walking out of the room, he turned back to Richards with a severe look of disappointment on his face. If anyone understood, said Johnson, I was sure it was going to be you. And he walked out. Shouting could be heard behind the closed doors of Dr. Daniels' office. His secretary could tell that it was the loud, booming voice of Dr. Daniels doing all of the shouting, and Dr. Johnson wasn't putting up any resistance. After about 15 minutes of this, Dr. Johnson opened the door with Dr. Daniels' voice following him, vibrating any object that wasn't tightly nailed down. "And not just fired," shouted Dr. Daniels, "but you will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Expect to hear from our lawyers." And he slammed the door so hard that a picture of the Alps came off the adjoining wall. Dr. Daniels' secretary heard him making several calls in the next 2 hours, sometimes sounding apologetic, sometimes sounding very diplomatic, sometimes barking orders. And when he finally came out of his office, he looked as if all the color had drained from his face. He was sweating profusely. "Emergency board meeting, 10 a.m. tomorrow," he said sharply. "Going home. Don't feel well." And he left the building. Had his secretary been looking out the window at the parking lot 5 minutes later, she would have been concerned to see Dr. Daniels doubled over with his car door open, vomiting on the hot asphalt before driving off. It was 10:15 the next morning, and Dr. Daniels' secretary found herself trying to placate a group of irate board members and calmly explained that Dr. Daniels was so sorry for the delay, but he should be here any moment. She then rushed back to his office to call Dr. Daniels one more time before calling 911. She had no idea where he was. When she walked into the office, she saw that his door was open. She rushed over to see Dr. Daniels looking out the window, laughing to himself. "Sir?" she said sheepishly. This stern mountain of a man turned to his secretary, and his normally pinched face immediately lit up like a firecracker. "Elaine!" he said brightly, and he bounded across the large office in 3 steps and gave his secretary an enormous hug. Elaine was scared to death. She had never seen the hard-edged Dr. Daniels show any sort of affection. She panicked. "Board meeting!" she yelled. He separated from her quickly and held her by the shoulders. "Board meeting," he repeated. "I love board meetings!" And then he floated down the hall to the conference room. Speechless, Elaine sat back down at her desk, stared off into space for a moment, and then immediately started searching the internet for a new job. Needless to say, Dr. Daniels' presentation was not well met. Not the idea to give away the virus free to everyone, regardless of income, class, race, or religion. Not the idea to hire back Dr. Johnson and make him president of the company. Not the idea to replace the building floors with grass and plant daisies in the hallway and replace the fluorescent lights with grow lights. Nor the idea to start off board meetings with hugs, end board meetings with hugs, and include hugging or holding hands whenever anyone had a good idea. And it was around the time of the suggestion of putting the virus in the local water supply that security was finally called. That night, 10 of the 12 board members got violently ill, and the next morning woke up with a new outlook on life. In retrospect, it was found that this was the first solid evidence that the new infection mutated into an airborne virus. Meanwhile, a media circus was forming around Dr. Johnson. At first, it was a mix of reports either focusing on a new wonder drug coming from a recently fired employee, or a negative story of a mad scientist run amok at EzerCorp. But 3 days after the story broke, Johnson was rehired by the board and elected company president. EzerCorp was singing the praises of Dr. Johnson and announced the beginning of construction of a 20-foot-tall statue of Dr. Johnson standing in the middle of a fountain to be erected in the lobby. The next week was a chaotic one. Reports came in of people getting violently ill and waking up a new person. A newspaper would run a story one day of a new plague spreading across a nation, a monster brought on by the force of medical science gone mad. Stories of the ideas of scientific ethics coming too far late to the table. Stories of a doomed world caused by humans choosing to do things because they can and not stopping to ask if they should. And the next day's headline would read, "Flowers, aren't they pretty?" The Center for Disease Control scrambled to put every emergency contingency plan into motion that they possibly could. But by the end of the week, they were filling crop dusters filled with the virus and performing flybys on remote areas. Only 8 days from the board meeting, over 80% of the world's population were infected. Society somehow still functioned, but barely. The euphoric infected populace were easily distracted by noises, shiny surfaces, and most often each other. But they still seemed to work. They loved their work. They indulged in it. In this way, deliveries were still made, food was still processed, and the basic functions of modern society kept its wheels turning. However, it was very difficult for the other 27% of the world to operate in this environment. Many found it unbearable to operate around so many beaming people with such a great outlook on life. Some found it easier to just act like they were happy, for fear of being assaulted with people asking them what was wrong and offering to give them hugs or to cough in their face so that they could contract the virus. Some of the uninfected just couldn't handle everyone's apparent niceness. They were either jealous of the fact that they could not feel such euphoria due to their immunity, or they felt completely alienated from the populace. Many of the unimmune ended up taking their own lives.